Okay, so let's go ahead and let's continue with our discussion on chapter four. So we were talking about freedom of religion last time, and um, we needed to finish off with our discussion of freedom of religion, and then we'll move to freedom of speech here. And of course, there's going to be there's going to be a lot that we'll talk about when it comes to freedom of speech here. So okay, so let's continue here with our discussion on freedom of religion because we do have some Supreme Court cases that we're going to take a look at here. So let's go ahead and let's see. Let's see. Okay, let's go to the entire screen here, and then we'll switch over. And so yeah, so we'll definitely finish off with freedom of religion, and then we'll start on freedom of speech here, right? So okay, so let's. I referenced this last time. The the uh, the famous lemon test when it comes to the freedom of religion, right? So last time we were talking about how that when you look at freedom of religion, how we have of course the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, right? That the United States government cannot establish an official religion, and that that's the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause discusses how you know religion is supposed to be a personal matter. Like I know, like for me, I'm Catholic, right? So today's Ash Wednesday, so um, it is customary, to go and get the ashes on your forehead, right? I'm still debating whether I should, whether I'm going to because of COVID. So, if I don't do that, then that's on me. That's between me and my faith, right? The government's not gonna, call me tomorrow and be like, hey, you didn't go get the ashes, yesterday. It was Ash Wednesday, so that's that because that's totally between me and my religion, right? So that's kind of what we talked about last time. Now, when it comes to the Lemon test here, the important Supreme Court case concerning religion of the First Amendment is Lemon versus Kurtzman. Now, I do recommend for you all to watch the Crash Course video that talks about freedom of religion because it does go into detail on the Lemon versus Kurtzman case. But again, I'll go over it in detail here. But if you need like a refresher, you could always watch that video as well as this one, if you're kind of not really understanding it, because this case is a little bit confusing. It's a little bit convoluted, but I'll explain. I'll do my best to explain it. So the Lemon test consists of three major parts. The Lemon test is meant to determine whether government involvement within religious institutions. We talked about how that there's debate about the separation of church and state. Like, do you have just a clear separation where the government and religion have no interaction with each other? Or do you have like a hybrid system where government and religion can have interactions and they can form partnerships, but they have to be, but there are some restrictions in terms of how they do this, right? Because again, going back to the Establishment Clause, that you can't, they can't establish official religion, and they also can't favor one religion over another, right? So we're going to take a look at the Lemon test to make sure that it is constitutional. And I'll give you all an example of where this was used, in the Lemon versus Kirkland case, right? So it consists of three major parts. The government involvement with religion must have a secular purpose. Its effect is neither to advance nor to inhibit religion, and it does not entangle government and religious institutions in each other's affairs. Okay, so let's kind of break this down here, and let me give you all some setup in terms of what the Lemon, case was about here. So in a couple of states up in the Northeast, Lewis, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, you had situations where you had these parochial schools, right? You had these religious schools. Now, when I was younger, when I was in elementary, I actually did go to Catholic school. There's a Catholic school in Edinburgh called St. Joseph's. That's where I went to for elementary. So I did attend Catholic school when I was younger. So I've been to these parochial schools. I know how they operate. Um, the idea behind these private parochial schools was that the schools were going to receive funding for education. So they were going to get, taxpayer money as long as they were not teaching religion. Okay. So, again, and again, I'll use myself as an example, right? Because if you go to a parochial school, you still have your major subjects, right? I took my, my English language arts, my reading, my social studies, my science, my mathematics. I did all that, right? Because in the private schools that they do teach that. What's the difference though is that in the private schools they'll also have like religious classes. They'll have like like in the Catholics, they'll have like catechism classes where they teach about learning about the communion and what that means and things like that and learning about catechism, right? So that, of course, you wouldn't see that in public schools, right? Because that of course would violate the freedom of religion. So the idea was that the private schools could receive that money as long as they weren't teaching those, those religious, slash catechism classes, depending on which faith you're in, right? So as long as the classes were all the secular subjects, that was fine. So that part was okay, right? Because as long as they were only teaching the core subjects and not teaching religion, that was fine. It's a fact neither to advance or to hinder religion. So again, because religion is not being taught in the daily curriculum, then they're fine. Now, this third one is where these parochial schools got in trouble. It does not entangle government and religious institutions in each other's affairs. So again, let me explain why the parochial schools got in trouble, because they weren't teaching religion. However, though, in the classrooms, they had religious imagery on the wall. They had the Ten Commandments listed. They had like paintings of Jesus and Mary and things like that. So even though they weren't acknowledging it, they weren't teaching it in that daily lesson, right? It's not like, okay, class, we're going to read the Ten Commandments, because that would obviously be a clear violation. But just having the commandments on the wall itself is a violation because the students are going to see it, right? It's on the wall for a reason. So because of the religious imagery that was plastered there, on the walls, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I guess that's not good, but displayed, right? Displayed on the walls. That's why they got in trouble here. So does this kind of make sense in terms of the lemon test, in terms of why, even though it was a secular purpose for why they were, in terms of education, but because the religion was still, somewhat present in there, does that make sense as to why that would be a violation of freedom of religion? Does that make sense or not really? I want to see if that makes sense to you. Because I know it's kind of a long explanation and it is very detailed, but I want for y'all to understand, does that make sense? As because of the fact that the religion was there, that's why it would be considered a violation of freedom of religion. Okay, Hazel says yes. Okay, good. So I'm glad that I was able to explain that to you, right? Because again, it is a little bit convoluted, but that's these schools, they failed the lemon test because the third one, they were entangling, right? Because the other aspect was that the states would have to go and make sure that the schools were not teaching religion. So you would have to have a situation where you would have to have like let's say someone from TEA, Texas Education Agency, like if that was going on in Texas, you would have to have like some employee, going to all the private schools and making sure that they're not teaching religion. So that would be excessive entanglements, because you would have the government, excuse me, hold on just a moment. You would have the government, I have a sneeze and it doesn't want to come up. You would have the government that would be having to constantly check on the private schools to make sure that they're not teaching religion here. So that's considered excessive entanglement, because they don't, because TEA isn't going to every school every day checking on the schools, right? They do it, they do their visits, and those visits, they don't, they don't do that all the time, right? But if they had to check every day, that definitely is excessive entanglement. So then there's a couple of other cases here. While the lemon test is hard to pass, the Supreme Court has allowed some exceptions. Trinity Lutheran Church versus Comer in 2017, the Supreme Court upheld the right of a religious school to benefit from state-funded playground resurfacing. Now, okay, so if we go back to the lemon test, you can see that this case would pass because the playground has nothing to do with religion, right? It's a secular thing. It's just a playground. It's not like they're attaching crosses to the playground equipment. Okay, that would be different, right? But if it's just a regular playground that you would find anywhere else, whether it's a public school or a private school, then that's considered okay, right? Because it just happens to be at a private school, a religious school, but because the religious equipment, I'm sorry, that's wrong. But because the playground is not religious equipment, right? Because it's just a regular playground, that's why it's okay, right? We also have the Van Orden v. Perry case. So the McCreary County and ACLU of Kentucky, these are too similar, right? Because they both involve the Ten Commandments here. So in Van Orden v. Perry, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a display of the Ten Commandments outside the Texas state capitol. Okay, and then the opposite occurred in Kentucky. Also notice they're in the same year, right? So this was the year of trying to fight back against the Ten Commandments being displayed in places, right? So in the same year, the Supreme Court ruled that the display of the Ten Commandments inside two Kentucky courthouses was unconstitutional. So in Van Orden v. Perry, it was fine, but in McCreary County, it was not fine. Now, let's take a little bit of time to kind of break this down. I want to see what you all think about these two cases. So I presented to you two very similar cases involving the displaying of the Ten Commandments. Why is the first one okay, but the second one isn't? I want to see if y'all can kind of let's see if we can take some time to kind of think this through a little bit. So why do you think this one? I guess I'll keep it up here and then we'll go to the chat. Why was the Van Orden case? Why was the Supreme Court okay with the Ten Commandments being displayed in this case, but not in the McCreary County? Does anyone see what the difference is here? I want to see what y'all think about this. Why is one okay, but not the other? It's a very similar situation, but there is one key difference here. Let's see if y'all can find it here. What do you think is the difference here between these two cases? Both involving the Ten Commandments, but there is something different about these two cases. I want to see what you all think. What do you all think about this one? What is the difference here between these two cases? Does anyone notice a difference here? Look at where look at where the Ten Commandments are being displayed here. Take a look at that here. You see how one's on the outside and one's on the inside? Does this make a difference? Does it make a difference that that in Van Orden the commandments are on the outside, but in McCreary County they're on the inside? Does that make a difference? What do y'all think? I mean, obviously, of course, the Supreme Court it made a difference, but why do you think that is? Why do you think that it does make? If you're just thinking of this like just rationally, why would it make a difference in terms of where it's located? What do y'all think? Let's take some time to kind of think about it. What do y'all think? Like, or should that make a difference? Because think about like if you're outside and you're walking along the state capitol grounds, which I don't know if any of y'all have been, I've been to it and it's really pretty. It's a massive area. You probably might not even see it, right? Because you're outside and and you could walk in any of these different areas. If you're inside a courtroom, is it so easy to avoid it if it's inside? Probably not, right? So does this kind of make sense as to why the Supreme Court ruled the way they did? Because on the inside, you really can't avoid it. So you're going to be subjected to it. But if it's on the outside, you can't avoid it, right? Yeah, exactly, Hazel, right? In the inside, it's much more obvious. You can't miss it, right? If it's outside in a large, on the grounds of a large area, then yeah, you might not even notice it, right? Yes, because of the location of where it was displayed, that does make the difference. Because again, going back to the Lemon case, right? The reason why those schools got in trouble was because it was displayed in the classroom. I mean, it's on the wall for a reason, right? Even if the teacher isn't acknowledging it, you're going to read it, you're going to see it because it's there. It's there to catch your attention, or else why else would it be on the wall? I mean, I've got, like here in my office, I've got, I've got a little poster of Abraham Lincoln, right? Obviously, of course, that says something about me that I'm a fan of Lincoln, right? I mean, I wouldn't have that up for no reason, right? So again, exactly. So the location and where these places are at, in terms of the displays, does have a big role into whether they, in terms of whether they, violate the freedom of religion or not. Okay, so of course we talked about the free exercise clause before. Protects the right to practice the religion one chooses, right? And as we also mentioned before, also protects the rights to be a non-believer. We talked about this last time, right? That it is sharing, right? I just want to make sure that it's sharing. So we did talk about this last time, right? That the decision to be atheist also is protected under free exercise, right? Because you're deciding whether you want to exercise your religion or not, right? You have that choice to exercise it or not. Now, another interesting case that doesn't get a lot of attention is the West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett. The court upheld the rights of children of Jehovah's Witnesses family to refuse to salute and pledge allegiance to the flag on grounds that their religious faith did not permit it. Now, again, I'm not an expert on Jehovah's Witnesses, so if I don't mean to offend anyone, if I'm wrong on this, please correct me. but from what I've read, and research, because I do tend to, I've always found religions to be very interesting, and I've always tried to learn about religions. Like I've taken like a sociology of religion class in college, so I've always been very fascinated with religions and the history that ties into religions and things like that. So as well as how religion has influenced history. So I am a big fan in terms of learning about religions and the actual faith itself, not just the effects of religion, but learning about the faith itself. So from what I've learned about, what I've researched about Jehovah's Witnesses is that they are a group of Christians who do not believe in, like they believe that they're like they believe in only like God's authority, so to speak, right? So they are not comfortable with pledging allegiance or pledging authority to any type of worldly beings or worldly institutions, right? So because they believe that their allegiance only belongs to God, so to speak. So again, if I butchered that, I apologize. That's kind of like just the very basic. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's just kind of like the basic gist of it, so to speak. So, but with that being said, the Jehovah Witnesses family, the family was not okay with their children having to stand up and recite the Pledge of Allegiance because this went against their religion. So they brought forth, this case, and the Supreme Court ruled that yes, that the school districts cannot make students, stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance if it violates if it violates their religion, right? Because that would be a violation of the First Amendment freedom of religion, right? So that's an interesting case that not a lot of people know about, but yes, that people can use religious exemptions as a way to if they don't feel comfortable like saying the Pledge of Allegiance and things like that. So you'll learn more about this in Texas government, how Texas tries to kind of they try to circumvent this a little bit, but again, that's more for Texas government. We'll talk about that more, like in a Texas government class. Which, by the way, if any of y'all do need Texas government, I'm teaching some this next in the summer. I've also got some more in the fall as well. So if anyone is interested, you're more than welcome to take. If you haven't taken it yet, I do offer some later on here. But anyway, that is what it is. Okay, all right. So let's also talk about some other cases. Okay, so the Supreme Court, and again, I'm sorry that there's a bunch of these cases. I assure you that you don't have to know all of them. But do be familiar with these cases. Again, I'm not, the test isn't going to ask you like, okay, tell me all 20 of these cases from chapter 4 and chapter 5, right? But do be familiar with some of these. Like for sure, the Lemon versus Kurtzman, that one, yes, that one definitely do be, that one, yes, definitely do, do understand that one. But let's talk about some other examples. Okay, so this, like I said, the Supreme Court distinguishes between religious beliefs and actions. The Free Exercise Clause prohibits religious discrimination by public or private entities. Okay. Um, Now the courts did disagree on some of these cases. So we'll take a look at the Burrell versus Hobby Lobby stores case and then the Holt v. Hobbs case. So in the Holt case, the court ruled that a prison policy prohibiting beards infringed on the ability of prisoners to worship as they please, right? So and again, I don't mean to toot my own horn. I've worked in a prison before, so so I kind of get where the prison was going on this, but yes, this is definitely a violation of freedom of religion. So some of these prisons, what they try to do is they try to treat them like boot camps, so to speak, right? Where and again, and I've seen this because, like I said, I worked in a prison and we did have this, right? We had where the inmates had to wake up at a certain time. They had to go to, whether it was to school or to do some, some work or things like that. And then of course they would come back in the evening, have a little bit of rec time, and then they'd have lights out by a certain time, right? So heavily regulating their day. Some of these prisons also, they also go a little bit further, right? Where they also demand that the inmates be like clean cut, shaven, again, try to replicate, like the way it is in the military. So one of these inmates, they filed a lawsuit, claiming that, their beard was, was key to their religion, right? And there are some of these religions that are like that, right? Like I know, like the Church of the Nazarene is strict about like hair length. Native Americans also, in terms of their religious beliefs, so the prisons got in trouble with this because these inmates were claiming, this violated their freedom of religion, right? That they felt that they were believing that they had a religious, a religious reason to be able to continue to have their hair and their beard the way they wanted to, right? So the court did agree with them, right? It did rule that prisons could not prohibit beards based on this violation of freedom of religion, right? So if people wanted to grow facial hair for religious reasons, which a lot of religions do have that, the prisons had to respect them. Okay, so again, so that that was religious discrimination that was being levied against by the inmates, and so they won that case. Now the Hobby Lobby case, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Hobby Lobby. Now let me explain this one, which I think some of y'all remember this case from several years ago. This was a case that got a lot of attention several years ago. More so, I don't remember hearing about the Holt case in the news, but I do remember hearing about the Hobby Lobby case. The Hobby Lobby case involved, the Hobby Lobby stores, right? Are y'all familiar with Hobby Lobby? That's the arts and crafts store. Now, did you also know that Hobby Lobby is what we would call a faith-based company, like Chick-fil-A? Have you all noticed that Chick-fil-A is what you would call faith-based, where it's operated, by Christian owners, and they and of course, obviously, of course, they instill their Christian values within the company. That's what, of course, why Chick-fil-A is always closed on Sundays. So Hobby Lobby is the same way, right? They're a faith-based organization, a faith-based company. So the issue was that you had this woman who was working for Hobby Lobby, and she was wanting for birth control to be covered under her health insurance plan that was being sponsored by Hobby Lobby. But Hobby Lobby did not agree with this. They did not want to provide, contraception and birth control, within her healthcare plan, because that violated their religious faith. So Hobby Lobby was making an argument that, hey, this goes against our religious beliefs, so we don't want to offer this coverage here. So then the woman filed suit. It got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Hobby Lobby. The court ruled that the owners did not have to provide female contraceptive coverage due to their religious beliefs. Now, this one is controversial, right? Because some people, you could see the argument on both sides, right? The side in favor of Hobby Lobby would say, well, yeah, it's a private company. They can do what they want. I mean, that's the that's the price you pay for working for a faith-based organization. But then on the other side, you can make an argument, well, what if that's the only job that you can get? So it's kind of a tough one, right? I mean, this is a difficult one, right? But again, the court did rule in favor of Hobby Lobby in this case, to where if the company has certain if they have religious beliefs, they can they can be exempt from this. And of course, this has also led to some other cases. Like, I don't know if y'all heard about the case of the what was it, the wedding cake designer in Indiana, I think, where they didn't want to design a cake for like a same-sex couple because they felt that violated their artistic freedom with the cake and things like that. So that's claiming a First Amendment right there as well. So it's kind of it's tough, right? Again, this is not so clear cut, and it's not so straightforward, right? So the courts can they can rule as you can see, you have two of these cases where they ruled oppositely. So again, the freedom of religion is not as clear cut as some people would say, right? I mean, like we talked about at the beginning of this discussion last time, right? That the wall of separation of church and state isn't that clear cut, so to speak, right? Anyway, so with that being said, does anyone have any questions on freedom of religion? So that ends our discussion on freedom of religion. Does anyone have any questions on freedom of religion before we move on to the press? And I think we'll start on freedom of speech. I don't know if we'll finish it today, but we can finish it next time. Anybody have any questions on freedom of religion? Yeah, the First Amendment is very it's going to take us like a week to go through just the First Amendment, but okay, sounds good. All right, so let's go ahead and continue here. All right, let's get to freedom of the press really quickly. We will talk about Citizens United. It's referenced here in this chapter, but we'll talk more about it in the campaigns and election chapter. It's a pretty interesting story here. Okay, so in the First Amendment, discussing freedom of the press, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Democracy requires what's called a marketplace of ideas. In 1938, the Supreme Court held that legislation that restricts speech must be held to a more exacting judicial scrutiny. The higher standard of judicial review is called strict scrutiny. So what the discussion here, and like we said, we'll talk about We'll talk about Hillary the movie a little bit later because that discusses the Citizens United case here. But what we're going to be talking about here is we're going to talk about the whole notion of why speech in a democracy is important and how countries that want to try to be as democratic as possible, they need to be very careful with how they handle freedom of speech as well as freedom of the press here. Because when you have a situation where a country is censoring people, censoring the press, censoring, the type of information that people that have access to, that creates a situation where you're giving the government, a lot of power over the way people think, the way people act, the way people operate. And so it's important in a free and democratic society to have what's called a marketplace of ideas, right? Where you don't just have one side that dominates the conversation. You have to be able to have the ability for people to be able to speak out and to be critical of the government. The government obviously doesn't want for people to be critical of it, but that is a requirement, right? We do need to have a system set up to where people will feel emboldened to be able to question the government. Now, again, there's a whole lot of discussion in terms of the way it's done, and what constitutes what constitutes the best practice, I guess you could say. But and that's a whole nother topic, for a whole nother day. But the idea behind, freedom of speech and freedom of the press is that you don't want to have a government that intimidates people, that tries to silence people, that creates a chilling effect where people don't feel like they can speak up because they'll be afraid of their livelihood, or they'll be, or even worse in some of these countries, afraid for their life, right? I mean, you can't go speak out against Kim Jong-un in North Korea, right? I mean, you'll disappear, never to be heard from again. Your family could, the same thing could happen to your family as well, right? So in free societies, we have to have the ability for that discussion to be able to occur here, right? So when we look at what's called political speech, right? So political speech was of great concern to the framers of the Constitution, right? However, even some framers found some speech difficult to tolerate. Because the truth is that this is not easy to accomplish, right? I mean, anyone, it's easy to want freedom of speech when it's stuff that you agree with, right? I mean, that's easy. But to advocate for the same type of protections for freedom of speech for people that you disagree with is a lot more difficult, right? Even the founders had an issue with it. Would you say that present day cancel culture infringes upon freedom of speech? Right. And we actually are going to get to cancel culture right now here in a bit. Yeah, that is definitely something that we have seen in the last couple of years, right? To the point where people are afraid to even say anything because there's the risk of like the mob mentality coming after people and trying to, cancel them and things like that. I mean, yeah, that's tough. It certainly makes it harder, right? It certainly makes it harder to be able to speak out and say the things that, and even if and what's most frustrating is if it's things that you can back up, but people still don't want to hear it. Like I'll give you an example, Elda, and this is just a personal example. So I feel personally that like my like when it comes to like like my freedom of speech when it comes to like talking about COVID, I feel that has like I feel that I've had situations where I feel like people have tried to cancel me in terms of me, saying things about like, you know, what I mean to say is that like when I'm talking about like things like, hey, like, people, maybe you should still consider masking, you don't want to risk it type of thing, like I get shot down by people, saying that, so yeah, it happens to me as well. Like, if you say something that the crowd is not agreeing with, if you're not going with the flow type of thing, it can be frustrating, right? For so as someone who still wants to be careful as much as possible, even though a lot of people really aren't being careful anymore, it can be frustrating, right? Because I still want to be careful, and so so yeah, and again, there's other examples, right? Obviously, of course, when we've seen people, you know obviously say the wrong thing when it comes to like upsetting people, but then they risk getting canceled and all that. So because right, I think that's an example of what we're saying, right? That it's easy to agree, it's easy to respect people's freedom of speech if you agree with it, but what if you disagree with it? What if you don't like it? you still need to respect, everyone's right to be able to speak, even if it's something that's just, even if you disagree with it, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable. Um, because if you don't, then that's going to create a situation where, is the government going to start picking and choosing what is acceptable speech and what isn't, right? And we don't want to get to that situation where, we have to second guess what we're saying because the government might come after us. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I know that's kind of like a long answer to that, but yeah, I'm not a fan of cancel culture. I'm not a fan of that at all. I really am not because, it's, because especially like if someone speaks out of ignorance, right? If someone is just maybe ignorant on a topic, I don't know if people should get canceled for that, so to speak. I mean, it's, what if they're just, what if they're wanting to learn? You know what I mean? I don't know, but it's a tough one, right? It's definitely something where, people. I do wish that people had a little bit more tolerance when it came to talking, right? Disagreements. Okay, totally agree. Disagreements are common, and different points of view should be respected. Yes, yes, exactly. Um, I shouldn't be attacked just because I want to still like kind of, I still live my life the way I do, right? It's not bothering anyone. If some people get offended because maybe I have opinions about these things, I mean, that's on them. I mean, it's not bothering you, so you got to be the one to deal with it, right? But it is what it is. But no, that's a very good question, though. Yes, and it's something that we're seeing more of it, right? We're seeing more of this cancel culture, unfortunately, both on the right and the left. Both of these. We see it everywhere, right? It's so right. Like I'm not a fan of that at all. I mean, and we'll get into some of these cases, like the Brandenburg v. Ohio case. Where even KKK members, should have their freedom of speech to be respected, even if it's something that is abhorrent, even if it's something that is very, is very out of the mainstream. But again, you don't want to have a situation where the government says, okay, that's acceptable, but that's not, unless, of course, it communicates a clear and present threat, right? But again, we'll talk about that right now here in a bit. But yeah, it's definitely something where, in a free society, you kind of have to take the good and the bad with what people say, right? And it is true, right? It is true that, and I've always said this, right? I think I've said this to you all before, right? That I want for us to have disagreements. I want for us to, now again, in an academic setting, I do expect for you all to be able to back up why you disagree, right? If you disagree with something, please explain why, right? Now, of course, that's not a requirement out in the real world, right? People can just disagree and be like a troll about it, which, I mean, now, of course, personally, I don't put up with that. If someone's just being disagreeable, I tell them, no, you're being a jerk. So I'm not mad at you because of you disagreeing with me. I'm mad at you because of the way you're saying it. That's a different story. And that's why I expect for us to disagree respectfully here. But yeah, people don't have to be respectful out there. So then I got to make an adjustment, right? I have to do something different. I can't change them. So I'm going to change my interaction with those people, right? And I've had to block a lot of people on Facebook because of the way they've talked to me, not because they disagree with me, but because the way they come at me. So, but that's a whole other story. So, but yes, Emma, you're exactly right in terms of how that different points of view should be respected, and we shouldn't just be quick to attack people just because we disagree with them, right? And yeah, and we'll definitely will discuss this more, and actually that leads us to what we were talking about, right? That when it comes to the famous test for government intervention of censorship, there has to be known as what's called the clear and present danger, like I mentioned, right? So the clear and present danger test, which came out in the Schenck v. U.S. Case, determines whether speech is protected or unprotected based on the capacity to represent a large danger to society. Now, of course, this test has been discarded somewhat, when it comes to, and what I mean by discarded, in that the Schenck v. United States case, let's see, does it mention it here? I don't think it does, but I'll reference it right here, right? So this is talking about the Schenck v. U.S. case, and again, the crash course video on freedom of speech talks about this as well, right? What was happening in the Schenck case was that you had this was during World War One. You had a situation where you had some groups of Americans and recent immigrants who disagreed with the United States' involvement in World War One. A lot of these groups were like anarchists and socialists and all these other people. So Schenck was one of these people, and he was handing out anti-war, paraphernalia, right? Anti-war literature, right? Discouraging people from, getting drafted into the military to go fight in Europe. So he was arrested because this was in violation of a recently passed law called the Espionage Act. Now, what I want for you all to understand is that this is not all that unique when it comes to not just the United States, but countries in general. And the Supreme Court did rule on this. They ruled that during wartime, that the rights that we expect are not quite as, they're not, how do I say this? There is a little bit of a limit to our rights depending on the circumstances and the situation, right? If there is a war going on, that heightens security a little bit, that heightens the tension within the country. And so the courts ruled that the circumstances of the time can also influence the government responses. Now, we've tried to get away from this though, right? Because, it's not right to still be, trying to censor people even during wartime, right? In fact, you could make a counter argument that that may be one of the best times to be arguing against the government. We've seen it, with Vietnam. We saw it during the war in Iraq, because there were a lot of people that were not fans of, George W. Bush's war in Iraq, right? Because, because the argument that Saddam Hussein was in cahoots with Al Qaeda, was a mass destruction, we turned out to be false. So there was reason to be questioning the government, right? So that's why it's been discarded in more recent times. But originally, we had what was called the clear and present danger when it came to the government at large. Now, we also have the clear and present danger when it comes to like immediate threats, which we'll talk about here in Brandenburg v. Ohio, right? Perfect segue, right? So in Brandenburg v. Ohio, which the cross course video does talk about this as well, right? It ruled that as long as speech falls short of actually inciting action, it cannot be prohibited even if it is subversive. So this was a situation where you had KKK members that were, sprouting off their rhetoric, right? Their very hateful rhetoric outside the mainstream. And so, they were arrested for what they were saying, but they filed suit because they claimed that that was their First Amendment right to say those things, and the Supreme Court agreed. The Supreme Court ruled that because the KKK members were just talking in generalities, just saying all their usual stuff, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, that is protected because it's not communicating any type of imminent threats. Okay. Now, if they were to say, if they were to say things like, okay, we're going to go to someone's house and we're going to go trash their house, right? That's different because now they've communicated a criminal threat. They know when it's going to happen, who it's going to happen to. So they've got a lot more information. But if they're just spouting off their generalities about how they feel about minorities, then that's protected because they're just saying what they believe, right? They're not actually saying that they're going to do something about it, right? At least they're not going to do something like, real. It's not something that's imminent, so to speak, right? So that's a Brandenburg v. Ohio, right? And that goes back to what we're talking about, right? That even with speech that we disagree with, speech that we're not fans of, and even if it's speech that most people are not fans of, that speech still has to be protected and still has to be protected under the Constitution because, again, like I said, what's to stop the government? If the government starts picking and choosing what speech is acceptable and what isn't, then you're going to have a situation where that's giving the government too much power. And then the government is going to be deciding for us in terms of, hey, this speech is acceptable and this speech isn't. So what if the government says one day, okay, all those people that are like at street corners with their megaphones talking about like, God and Jesus or whatever, we're going to go after them now because we don't agree with that speech, right? So that's why you don't want to give the government that much power to decide what is acceptable and what isn't, as long as it's not a communicable threat, right? If it's just people just mouthing off, then then you're right, and that is that's supposed to be protected, right? We will talk about Buckley v. Vallejo as well as the Citizens United case later on. This declared that provisions limiting campaign spending by or on behalf of the candidates was unconstitutional. So we'll talk about these cases. The Citizens United, the FEC versus Wisconsin. We'll talk about these cases later on because again they are important, but we'll reference them again when we get to the campaigns and election chapter because this deals with campaign funding, whether are there limits to how much money you could donate to candidates because donations are considered, they are considered examples of speech, because it's political speech, right? Because you're making a political statement by donating to a candidate. So you're showing your support for a candidate. So these cases deal with that, right? And the Citizens United case talks about, does this deal with with corporations, right? So it declared that a law that banned corporate funding of independent electioneering broadcasts was unconstitutional, right? Because and again, we'll go more into Citizens United because it is a very fascinating case here, but it was basically talking about how you had campaign finance reform such as the McCain-Feingold Act, which was limiting the ability for companies and corporations to donate to to donate in elections, right? But again, we'll talk more about this here later on. Okay, so let's see. I want to see how much time we have. Okay, we got about 15 minutes. Okay, so let's see. Let's go to. All right, let's see. Okay, let's see. Yeah, let's talk about some of this here really quickly, and then let me just take a swig of water, and then we'll finish up here for today. So hopefully this discussion's been interesting for you all. You know, a lot of people like talking about freedom of speech. Now, what I do need to also mention to you all is that there are some misnomers when it comes to freedom of speech, because a lot of people will say like, "Oh, it's a free country; I can say whatever I want." Well, that's partially true, right? You know, it's not like someone is like holding your jawbones, and it's not like you're like a puppet or something like that, right? And they're moving your mouth to where you can still say those things, but it doesn't mean that you're also going to be free from consequences, right? So you probably heard that phrase, right? Freedom of speech, but that doesn't mean you have freedom of consequences, right? So that's why you got to be careful when it comes to like the things that you're saying, especially like if, let's say, like an example would be like, let's say you're criticizing your boss like on social media. Yeah, especially like if your boss is like if you work in the private sector, the First Amendment applies to the government, right? Where the government is not going to censor your speech, right? The government is not going to you're not going to get in trouble by speaking out against the government, right? This is why you have situations where you can criticize President Biden. Oh, like what is it, the "Let's Go Brandon" thing? Those are things that like that people will talk about, right? Or some of the things they said to Trump, right? And every president gets these things, right? Every president gets criticized, right? It just kind of comes with the territory, right? Because when you put yourself that high up there, you're going to get blamed for a lot of things, right? The president always gets the blame for everything, right? I mean, I'm sure people are blaming Biden because it's like almost 100 here, right? They might be saying like, oh, like global warming, like and then they might take global warming here, but then we see how cold it is in Billings, Montana, right? So, but it is what it is, right? The president definitely gets the blame for all these things. But so let's talk about fighting words here really quickly. So speech can lose its protected position only when it moves from the symbolic realm to the realm of actual conduct. So like I mentioned, right? If it's speech that's going to communicate, that's communicating a threat, right? Now, an example of unprotected speech would be expressive speech that directly incites physical conflict with the use of so-called fighting words, right? So this was the Chaplinsky case versus New Hampshire, right? In 1942, a man who had called a police officer a goddamn racketeer and a damn fascist had his conviction upheld by the Supreme Court because such words are not meant as an essential part of any exposition of ideas, right? So the idea is, if you're just telling somebody off, well, what do you expect, right? I mean, any reasonable person would expect that you're looking for a fight, right? If you tell someone off, right? So and then Dennis v. United States, the court ruled that there is no public interest in permitting lewd, obscene, profane, libelous, or fighting words. However, the court has reversed almost every conviction based on arguments that the speaker used fighting words, right? So they originally used it, but then the Supreme Court kind of has walked this back a bit, just kind of like with the Schenck case as well here. Okay, let's talk more about this hostile speech, kind of like what we were talking about, like with the cancel culture, right? So increased activism by minority women's groups has prompted a movement against language deemed to be racial, ethnic, or gender slurs. Universities attempted to develop codes to suppress such speech and encouraged by the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education, right? They call these like the free speech zone, so to speak, right? Critics have charged the procedures encouraged by OCR in case of sexual misconduct ignores the rights of the accused. And similar issues are seen in public and private corporations with successful lawsuits alleging employers or managers created a hostile or abusive work environment. Now, this is a tough situation, right? This is a tough one because as someone who was bullied at work at one of my previous jobs, hostile work environments do exist. They do. I've been in an abusive work environment. It happens. But we also have to be careful, right? We have to be careful when it comes to how we go about these situations, right? So because the problem here is that everyone's definition of what is hostile and what is abusive is going to be different, right? if your boss tells you, that, if they talk to you about, things that you can improve, sadly, some people might take that as being hostile, right? But it depends on how they say it, right? That's kind of like, and again, this is just my personal opinion. Please don't take this as like, gospel or legal advice or whatever. This is just kind of like what I've gone through, right? And feel free to disagree if anyone has any difference of opinions, right? But from in terms of what I've seen, like in workplaces, and I'm sure some of y'all have also had difficult workplaces as well, right? Um, there obviously, of course, has to be like, it has to be something where it's, you look at the tone of voice, you look at the words that are used, you look at the I guess, the manner of the things are said and things like that. So you have to look at it more holistically, right? If you're going to determine whether a place is hostile or not, right? It's there is workplace bullying, there is narcissism. It happens. Like I said, I've seen it. It's happened to me. Um, but again, are we in a situation where, are we actually looking at it objectively? See, that's what I'm not sure. That's what I think can be looked at as kind of an issue, right? Where, if you've got situations where nobody can really say anything to anybody, that could be a problem as well, right? I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on this? I mean, what do y'all think? I mean, I'm just kind of giving my thoughts here really quickly. I mean, like, what do y'all kind of think about that? I mean, let's kind of open it up the floor here for a bit. Like, so I shared like I guess kind of like my, from things I've gone through and experienced. I mean, do any of you all have other thoughts on this? I mean, any other opinions, or maybe you all have gone through some of these types of situations yourself? I mean, what do y'all think about kind of what I was kind of saying here, right? Does anyone disagree with this, or does anybody kind of get what I'm saying? Or it's because it's a tough situation, right? I mean, because it's because I've been a supervisor myself as well, and of course, I definitely try to, and again, as a professor, I kind of view myself a little bit as a supervisor as well. Like, I look at you all like as my constituents. I look at you all as that we work together and things like that. So I try to be as respectful to you all as possible, right? So I guess I just kind of want to see, kind of what you all think about some of this here, right? In terms of maybe, experiences that you all have gone through, like in the workplace and things like that. It's definitely tough, right? I mean, it's tough to have a clear definition or a clear like a one size fits all approach is very difficult to do, right? Because every workplace is different. So Ella, you left the workplace because you were harassed. Okay, right. So that's definitely very, clearly, right? And that's why a lot of these, companies, because it's the law, right? We've, thanks to like, the Civil Rights Act, we have legislation that, that protects people against like, sexual harassment and things like that. That's why we always have these trainings and things like that. But not all the harassment is protected, unfortunately, right? What if it's just someone just being, like a jerk to you, and they're just not leaving you alone and they're bullying you, right? So that's a little bit more on the gray area, right? And and I've been an advocate on this, right? Like I'm a part of some of these groups and organizations that fight back against like workplace bullying and narcissism in the workplace, things like that. I'm very active on that. But yes, and I'm sorry that you went through that, right? It's I've been I've been harassed too at a workplace, and unfortunately it does happen a lot more often than a lot of people think. That's one of the reasons why they do these polls, like, hey, how many, it usually fluctuates, but I've seen that a lot of people do not like their jobs, and usually at the top of the list is because of like who they work for, right? So, but right, it's a tough situation, right? Because do we have clear guidelines on what's acceptable in the workplace when it comes to how people are supposed to interact with each other, right? Now, I do know that like STC and some of these other organizations, they do have their own policies put forth where we need to be respectful, we need to respect people's cultural differences. That's why we do all these trainings, with that. But yes, I'm very sorry that happened to you, because yeah, that's definitely very unfortunate. It's just it's tough, right? It's hard to come up with like a clear standard that everyone needs to follow, unless of course you're part of a protected class, right? When it comes to like race, gender, age, things like that. But what if it has nothing to do with that, but the person is just being mean to you and they're singling you out because they find you a threat because they think you're going to take their job or something like that, right? It's just it's very very difficult. Yeah, it is tough. It is. And I'm not going to pretend like I know all the answers because I don't. I'm just kind of talking a little bit about how that it's a tough situation, right? You want to, you don't want to, you don't want to, cancel people. You don't want to silence them, right? But at the same time, if someone is being abrasive to you at work, there should be some consequences for that, because there's no need for that, right? There's no need to be picking on people and going after people if they do anything to you. You know what I mean? So it's tough. It is a tough situation, and I hope that that we can definitely continue this conversation, you know, later on, because it's definitely a good conversation in terms of, but I want you all to definitely understand why it definitely is a difficult situation here. Okay, let's kind of finish up here really quickly, and then we'll stop here a bit. So let's just cover a couple things. So hate speech, of course, is also another important case. Jurisdictions passed ordinances banning hate speech or forms of expression intended to assert hatred toward a single group. So again, this was in response to, we talked a little bit about this in the Brandenburg v. Ohio case, right? So again, these cities, I do get where they're coming from, right? They mean well. I'm seeing that, they're trying to have good intentions, but you cannot be limiting people's speech, even if it is hate speech, right? Because again, that goes back to what we're saying, right? That what counts as hate speech, right? That's giving the government too much power, right? So the Rav v. City of St. Paul case was a case where you had they burned this crudely made cross on the property of one of these African American families in St. Paul, which is in next to Minneapolis, right? It's Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities. So the court ruled, and this was the unanimous decision, ruled that states that these ordinances must be content neutral, right? They cannot prohibit actions directed at some groups but not others. And so the broad implications of the Rav's decision suggest that all hate speech is protected, right? So you can't have that's fine, Adriana, no worries. I'm sorry that we're almost done here, but you can always go back and watch the recording if you would like to hear. But yes, right. So the thing that we need to take away from this, of course, is that like I'm saying, right, that you kind of have to take the good and the bad, even if it includes hate speech, because again, we don't want for the government to be deciding what is acceptable, what isn't. That's also why some of these hate groups, they are very vocal, right? I don't know if you all have heard of like the Westboro Baptist Church. That's the group they go and they protest at like military funerals because of like that America fosters homosexual behavior, things like that. That it's just very, very, very like, very, that's really like that is really how do I say it? Just that that's very sad to see. You know what I mean? It's hard not to have an opinion about that. It really is. I was trying to like, but it's difficult to see. But again, when it comes to freedom of speech, I mean, they have that right to be hateful. You know what I mean? It's again, it's kind of like the good and the bad that we get here, right? It's now of course you have the right to counter protest them, and that's why there are counter protesters that go. When they show up, then you have other protesters that go and protest them, right? So that is also allowed as well, as long as of course they're not fighting each other. Okay. Student speech really quick, and then we'll end for today. So restrictions apply for student speech, though. There is conditionally protected speech for high school students in public schools, but it is limited, right? And what we mean by this, so school punishment for sexually suggestive speech is permissible. The court has further restricted student speech by defining their speech in journalism as part of their education and not protected like adult speech. So let me just check the time we have really quickly. Okay, so let me just finish this one and then we'll finish for today. I think we're okay. Yeah, okay, so yeah, we'll finish it for today. Or I think we could also talk about, well, let's talk about commercial speech really quickly, and then we'll also hit up student speech. So the famous case of student speech is the Morse v. Frederick case. This was the court ruled a school could suspend a student, Joseph Frederick, for displaying the banner that read "Balling hits for Jesus." This is interesting, right? Because there's a good video in the additional resources that talks about this, right? Where Frederick was just doing this as a joke, right? He just wanted to do this as a joke, right? So he got in trouble for it because it was a school sponsored event, right? So the idea behind student speech is that the schools can regulate that speech because the school has an educational responsibility for the students, right? You're not acting as a private citizen, right? This is also not too different from like me as an employer, right? Like I can't go and use my work computer for, for personal use, right? Because it's not my computer, right? It's STC's computer. I have to use it for STC related, work. That's a requirement, right? So same thing with the students, right? That's why, like, if you all had lockers in high school, they could search them, right? They didn't have to get a search warrant for them because you're borrowing the school, the school's items, right? And so you don't have this Fourth Amendment right against, searches and seizures because it's not yours, right? You're borrowing it from the school. So it's the same reason why the schools can be strict on the student speech. So even when it comes to like school newspapers, they can restrict that. They can restrict that because you're not acting as a private citizen, right? You're acting as a student, so to speak, right? So does that kind of make sense in terms of? I know I could go a little bit more detail, but I wanted to kind of finish really quickly. And then commercial speech is also subjected to limited regulation. This is not nearly as strongly protected as political speech. Examples include prohibition of false and misleading advertisement by the FTC. However, commercial speech has become more protected under the First Amendment. But again, we'll talk more about this later on here. We'll talk about more on this later on here. Okay, we have to finish this a little bit more on freedom of speech, and then we'll get to. We should be able to finish everything by next week. Okay, everyone. So, okay, sorry that we kind of ran a little bit extra time here. We should finish freedom of speech. Okay, yes. So the chapter 4 will be. I'll move it to next week. Okay, since we're not done with chapter 4 yet, I'm gonna push it back. So just I'll work on that right now. When we're done with class, I'll be pushing back due dates. So yes, you don't have to worry about finishing chapter 4 this week because again, we're kind of this chapter is very lengthy. It is very lengthy, unfortunately. So, but it's okay. It's fine. It's we'll get through what we need to get through. But yes, that's correct. So don't worry about chapter 4 this week. We'll push it back until next week. I'm pretty sure we should be able to finish chapter 4 by next. Yeah, we should be able to finish it by next. Well, we have. Yeah, I think we should be able to finish it by Monday. So we'll do that, and then we'll just push the due dates back. Okay. So anything else? No, I don't think so. I think the signature assignment rough draft is due after we come back from spring break, which next week we will take some time to go over that. Okay. So next week we will take some time to go over that. Maybe on Monday, we'll see. I do want to go over the signature assignment really quickly with you all in detail so that way you all can have an understanding of it. But yeah, we'll go over that next week. So, okay, everyone. So anything else before we end for today? Anything else? So don't be alarmed if the due date hasn't been changed. I'll change it right now this afternoon. So anything else? You all have any other questions? Anything else? Anything else? Nothing else? Okay. All right. Sounds good, everyone. Okay. All right. Well, again, okay, let's go to an end for today. So thank you all so much. Thanks for the really good discussion. I know that talking about freedom of speech is not easy. Sometimes I even feel like, I kind of got to be careful with what I say, things like that, but I'm grateful that you all are appreciative of, the discussion, what we're talking about. I can assure you all that, that I definitely respect each and every one of you all's and you all's right to be able to voice your opinions. So please never feel that you can't disagree or you can't give your thoughts. Again, the only thing I ask is just to be able to explain why you believe those things, right? If you think I'm crazy for being strict about COVID still, please tell me why. Like it's fine. We can have those those conversations, right? It's just but as long as we try to be respectful of it, that's totally fine. But yeah, we should be okay. So okay, everyone, sounds good. Just because it's an academic setting, right? So okay. Sounds good, everyone. So you all take care, be safe, and please be safe. Please keep cool. It's almost 100 degrees out here, so it's almost like we skipped spring, right? We went straight to summer. But okay, everyone, sounds good. We all take care, be safe, and we'll see you all next week. Okay, have a good weekend, and you all take care, everyone. All right, and if you all have any questions, please email me. Okay. Okay, everyone, sounds good. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you all. Yes, you too, Hazel. Thank you so much. Take care. We'll see you all next week. Thank you. Be safe, everyone. Thank you.